Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast, interview your ideal clients, and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by a repeat guest and my good friend, Brett Trainor. He is principal in the industries practice at Point B. Brett, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back on. It's hard to believe you guys are closing in on 1,000 episodes.
Yeah, it definitely is. I feel that way as well. For folks who didn't hear your last episode, don't know you as well as I do, as we are often talking about great sales and marketing books and podcasts to follow, definitely recommend folks go back and check out your 4-part framework for growth back in episode 756 when you were first on the show. But for folks who are not doing that just yet, want to know a little bit about you, let's give folks a little bit of background on you and what you and the team at Point B are up to these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't take to admit it, but I've been almost 25 years now in the B2B space, almost all of it on, the go-to-market side from, sales ops, demand generation, you name it. And I've probably held a role before converting over to the consulting side where I get to help other companies. And my primary focus is working with, B2B companies and leading them through large transformations. We've got a lot of revolutions or evolutions occurring now in this space. And, that's my primary role, is to help companies through those transformations.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to be talking about something that everybody knows, and that is, that buyers have more of the power, the control in B2B sales cycles than ever before. But we're going to be talking about what you can actually do about that and some analysis that you can go through to really equip yourself to deal with that reality. But maybe we set the stage there a little bit, Brett, with, some of the things that you've seen in your practice and the customers that you're working with where this shift has been happening. And then we'll get into some of the tactical things you can do to approach it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the biggest changes when I started doing a little bit of research on kind of this, it's almost more of a revolution of the change, is looking at companies that were kind of founded or built prior to what I would call the modern internet. So before SaaS companies really aren't structured to sell easily in today's environment, right? With the buyers are getting younger, they grew up on technology, they're used to searching for product information online, right? You have the growth of the review sites that basically provide user and peer reviews of technologies. That's expanding into other B2B businesses as well. And they're really looking for a different experience from the selling organization. So I've become very passionate about this topic of getting people to get out of their traditional thought process of how do I optimize my sales process? And it's really around, how do I align around with the way my buyers want to purchase? So what does their purchase process look like? So yeah, I think that's a pretty good context to, in some industries are more mature than others. Mm-hmm. Where we're seeing the advantages is the companies that actually do make this pivot first have a definitive first mover advantage. And I don't care if you're a $1 billion company or, $1 million or less, that if you align first, you're going to provide a better experience for those buyers and you're going to see a larger percentage of that market share.
Yeah, absolutely. I know from, the industry I was in before, where there were definitely processes, mentalities, ways of going to market that were definitely predating, the modern selling era, as my friends over at Outreach like to say. So let's talk about what we can do about it, Brett, because I've recognized, the shift that you're talking about. I think that goes without saying for a lot of our listeners. So there are three different types of analysis that you advocate for that folks can do to really align their processes with the buying journey so that they can be that first mover in their space. So talk to us about the first one of these, and that's conducting a customer experience analysis.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this. And I think too often we just assume we know what our customers are thinking, but by actually going out and having conversations or using a third party to have conversations with preferably customers that have just gone through your entire process and are now onboarded, whatever business that may be, and ask the questions around their overall experience, right? I think traditionally with some of the older companies that you get, or the feedback I would get, well, it felt like I was working with 4 different companies as I went through the process, whether it was lead gen to sales to the onboarding to my account management team. It wasn't a consistent experience. So I think that's really the first step, is really understand from the customer's viewpoint, where things are working well and where things aren't working well. And if you hear, it was really hard to find information on your product, that's kind of the cost of doing business. Make sure your website easily and clearly states, your value props. So as it gets into the human interaction, it's a consistent experience. So that's where I would start first to help you align where you need either more visibility, more information, a human touch is really around that overall customer experience.
Yeah, I love that. So Brett, let's talk about the next one, and that's a one-loss analysis. I know, sales leaders, especially frontline managers, are looking at this maybe with varying degrees of success or, structured process around it. What's your thought here on how to do this successfully?
Yeah, I think, again, this almost goes hand in hand with the customer experience. They're going to tell you how it was working, interacting with your organization. But when you do the one-loss analysis, you really find out why the customers are buying from you. You may assume that this feature on this widget is better than everybody else's, but they may tell you, no, you were easier to buy from whatever host. But I think that the real value can come from with the loss analysis, right? Why didn't you buy from me? Either they bought from a competitor or they didn't buy at all. So is it something that was in the messaging? Is it a product flaw? Where was that breakdown? So I think combining those two customer analysis will give you a really good picture of where you stand with not only your product, but also your model.
Yeah, absolutely. Something you touched on there is, it may be how they felt through the process. I imagine doing that one loss analysis, oftentimes, it's comparing our price to the competitors, or we're looking at something else that's very quantifiable and logic based. But, we all know that people make decisions by emotion and then back them up by logic, right? And so what's your thought there on, is that really kind of tying the two together, the one loss analysis and the customer experience analysis? Because maybe in the experience, you're asking more of those feeling questions. How did it feel when you were onboarded? Or, what made you feel more comfortable to go with our competitors, where you could maybe uncover some of those emotions that drove the decision away from your company?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, I can't remember what podcast I was listening to, but the human to human, right? So it's maybe not B2B. You're still buying from a human at the end of the day, unless you buy something completely online, but which isn't the case for most businesses. And, some of the more successful sales reps that I've either studied or worked with have that connection with the customer. I don't care if you're still in digital ads or all the way to consulting services. That buyer and that buyer group felt very comfortable with you, the salesperson, leading through the process, right? So if you think about old habits, how do you to sell hard and cold call and just continue to bang away? Really what those customers are looking for now is help along that journey, right? Make it as frictionless as possible as I go through, and where they're happy to give you their money, at the end of the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We just had my friend Brian Sowards from the Muse on a few episodes back, and he was talking about, he went to the point of creating a Basecamp workflow for his customers to be able to make the buying process easy, because he knew he had to engage different functional areas and how to get them to just see the checkboxes that they would likely need to go through, because oftentimes buyers don't know what the buying process is supposed to look like for them. And so it's our job to make it as frictionless as possible. So if you've done a customer experience analysis, you've done a one-loss analysis, what's the next step from there in this process of analyzing the current state, Brett?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is look at a gap analysis, right? And it doesn't have to be super formal, but you should be able to clearly see the way your sales process is set up, or even the entire engagement model is set up from, lead gen all the way through, to post sale, is aligning with what you're hearing from your customers, right? To me, that's the easiest place to pivot. Now, if you're a billion-dollar company, it's not going to be something you can do overnight, but I think you can then start to prioritize, all right, where's my biggest gap, right? If I don't have my information online, people can't find out about me or don't understand what my product or solution is by looking at the website, then you've got, probably a high priority step one is to make sure that your communication and messaging is consistent across platforms. But really, to answer your question more directly, is look at your current flow. And if you don't have flows, I strongly encourage you to do that Basecamp or otherwise, and then map that against, everything that you've heard from your customer. That should give you a pretty good roadmap of, areas of opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So then from there, if you've done a customer experience analysis, a one-loss analysis, especially looking at those losses, which I think is great advice, Brett, and then you do a gap analysis comparing the current state to where you need to be, what are the next steps from there? Is it prioritizing what needs to be first to work on? What's going to be maybe the biggest lever to move that rock?
Yeah, exactly. It's to prioritize and do something about it, right? Sometimes there are companies I work for, it's analysis paralysis, right? Well, we're going to keep analyzing. Once you get a pretty good idea where your opportunities are, make a plan around it and prioritize to move the biggest boulders first. Or if there's a progression of things, if the feedback came back very specific in one area, where that area is, but then take the time to shore up the entire process, right? And I think our friends in sales and marketing that go through that alignment, right? The handshake deal is usually a problem area, depending on how large the organization is. But I think, again, using the direct customer feedback should help you prioritize.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other ways that you've seen this executed really well, even, down to the tactical ways that people look at the flows of the buyer journey, any tools you use to kind of visualize those workflows that you mentioned there, Brett? Anything else that you would add that you think listeners could benefit from as they look at, taking these 3 analysis steps and then prioritizing the things that they find and taking next steps to execute on them?
Yeah, I think one thing maybe we can link in the show notes is I've broken down kind of the whole go-to-market model into 8 buckets, right? There's 8 distinct, I call them buckets. So start anything from lead generation to lead management to sales opportunity management, all the way through, process and order, fulfill and order, post-sale, that there's really 8 distinct buckets, and some may be more prominent than others, but I would use that at a very high level to understand where the potential breakpoints are within the org, and then you can dig deeper into those processes, because I know not everybody's a process geek, but at least understanding it, a couple levels down would go a long way in understanding where your internal issues or breakdowns are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Brett, this has been great, man. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, ask any follow-up questions, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is still the best bet. I interact with a bunch of folks there. So it's Brett Trainor, Trainor, not ER.
Yeah, absolutely. So Brett, it's fantastic to talk to you, and it's always fantastic to have you on the show as well, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.